Elias Ward had lived under wide skies for so long that silence had become his closest companion. Every morning, he woke before the sun, not because he had to, but because the early light felt like a friend checking in on him. The first thing he always did was lift his hat, run a hand through his dusty hair, and breathe in the cool air of the open range. It reminded him that he still had another day, another chance to find meaning on the long trail he called home. Elias was a cowboy by skill, but a wanderer by heart. He worked for ranches when they needed him, helped travelers when he found them, and kept mostly to himself. People in the nearby towns knew his name, but they never knew his story. The truth was simple yet heavy. He had lost his family to illness years ago, and the loss had hollowed him from the inside. He left the town where he once belonged because every road and doorway there carried memories he could no longer carry. Now, life was measured in sunsets, the gentle pace of cattle, and the sound of his horse's steps. His horse, Dusty, was a calm, patient gelding with soft brown eyes. Dusty didn't talk, of course, but Elias often spoke to him anyway. A man alone has to let words out somehow, and Dusty never complained. That evening, Elias had set up his small camp near the base of a low hill. The sky above him was stretching into colors: gold, peach, and the faint blue that comes right before night. Elias liked that time of day the most. He cooked a simple supper over the fire, something warm enough to settle his stomach and light enough that he did not feel sleepy too early. While the food warmed, he leaned back on his saddle and watched the world darken. The desert looked peaceful from a distance. A soft wind moved through the grasses, and the land seemed to breathe. Elias listened to that quiet. He always listened. Solitude sharpened his awareness, so even the smallest sound could pull his thoughts in a new direction. Sometimes, he wondered what people in town were doing at that moment, sitting with family, talking with neighbors, maybe even laughing together. He thought he had forgotten what laughter sounded like, but every so often he heard it in his memories. Faint and flickering, like a lantern on a windy night. Life had changed, but he held those memories close, even when they stung. After finishing dinner, Elias cleaned his pan and set more wood on the fire. He liked to keep a flame going until the stars were fully awake. The fire's glow made him feel less like a shadow moving through the world, and more like a man who still had a place under the heavens. Dusty grazed a few yards away, his tail swishing gently. Elias watched him with quiet appreciation. "You're good company," he murmured, and Dusty flicked an ear as if he agreed. Elias smiled at that small, familiar response. In a world that moved too fast and changed too often, Dusty's steady presence was a comfort. Night settled slowly, wrapping the world in blue-gray calm. Elias lay back and looked up. Stars filled the sky in patterns he had learned as a boy. He traced them with his eyes, remembering the stories his father once told him, stories about travelers who followed the stars, never losing their way as long as they kept looking up. He missed those stories more than he admitted, even to himself. As the night deepened, Elias closed his eyes and let the sounds of the land guide him. Crickets chirped from the brush. A soft breeze whispered across the rocks. Dusty shifted his weight with a gentle snort. Everything felt steady, almost safe. But underneath that calm, there was a tug in Elias's chest he could not explain. A feeling that something in the night was different. The wind seemed too restless. The quiet seemed too thin. Elias had lived close to the land long enough to sense when something was out of place, when the earth seemed to hold its breath. He sat up slowly, listening. At first, he heard nothing unusual, but the feeling stayed. He reached over to adjust a log in the fire, watching sparks rise into the darkness and fade. The night grew deeper, and the sky grew darker, but the unease did not leave him. Elias whispered to Dusty, "You feel that?" Dusty lifted his head slightly, ears turning forward. Elias frowned. Dusty did not react like that unless something stirred far off in the distance. The horse was gentle, but not nervous, so when he showed alertness, Elias took it seriously. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a faint scent Elias couldn't name. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't rain. It was something unfamiliar. He stood and walked toward a small rise near the edge of his camp. From there, he could see farther into the open land. The moon climbed higher, giving the plains a faint silver glow. Elias scanned the shadows, patient and still. Nothing moved. Still, the unease tugged at him. He stayed awake longer than usual, letting his senses stretch into the night. Sometimes, being alone for too long taught a man to trust feelings more than reason. Elias didn't know what the night was holding, but he did not ignore the quiet tension that brushed against his thoughts. Finally, after a long watch, he returned to the fire and settled back onto his bedroll. He kept his hat low over his eyes, but he did not truly sleep. His thoughts wandered to old memories, his family, the life he left behind, the long, quiet road that had brought him here. He wondered if his path would ever cross with something meaningful again, or if he was meant to wander forever. The night stretched on. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. Dusty rested calmly once more. The land seemed normal again. Soft, wide, peaceful. Elias almost convinced himself that his earlier feeling had been nothing more than his mind stirring up shadows. But the truth was different. Somewhere far off, beyond what his eyes could see, a life was changing. A path was bending. A moment was building that would unfold with the coming dawn. Elias did not know it yet, but the world was already shifting toward him, already weaving him into a story he had not asked for, but one that would find him all the same. As he drifted toward sleep, the stars above him shone brighter, as if watching over what was soon to happen. The desert air cooled, the night settled deeply, and everything around him grew still. In that stillness, Elias remained unaware that fate had already begun to move. He did not yet know about the young Apache girl wandering alone in the darkness. He did not know about the trouble that followed her or the journey she had been forced into. He did not know that the path he walked would soon cross hers in a way neither of them could have predicted. For now, he slept lightly. A lonely cowboy under the open sky, unaware that the next sunrise would bring the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. Night was still young when Elias drifted into light sleep, but his mind stayed half awake, listening to the soft hum of the desert. This was a habit he had built over years, never fully resting, always keeping one ear open to the sounds of the land. It had kept him safe many times, and tonight, it would guide him again. Somewhere between dreaming and waking, Elias sensed something unusual. It wasn't a noise at first. It felt more like a change in the air, a gentle stir that did not belong to the calm night. His eyes opened slowly, and for a moment he thought he had imagined it. But then Dusty, his faithful horse, lifted his head and gave a soft, uncertain sound. Elias pressed a hand to the ground beside him. Sometimes, the earth shared stories through tiny vibrations. Tonight, the ground felt faintly restless, as if light footsteps moved somewhere far away. He sat up quietly, not wanting to startle anything or anyone nearby. His campfire had burned down to soft embers, casting only a dim glow. Elias liked it that way. The darkness made the world quieter, softer, easier to understand. He listened again. This time, he heard it clearly, a distant shuffling sound, like someone moving through dry brush. It wasn't the quick steps of an animal. These movements were careful, almost cautious. Someone was out there. Elias stood slowly, giving Dusty a calming pat along the neck. "Easy," he whispered. Dusty relaxed, but kept watching the darkness with his ears forward. The sound grew a little clearer. Elias took a few steps away from the fire, letting his eyes adjust. The moonlight offered just enough brightness to make out shapes on the land, rocks, shrubs, and open patches of sand. But in the distance, near a cluster of yucca plants, he saw something shift. It looked like a small figure, unsteady on its feet. Elias felt his chest tighten. A traveler? A lost child? Someone who needed help? He approached slowly, respecting the night and whoever moved through it. As he got closer, the shape became clearer, a young girl wearing simple, handmade clothing, with long dark hair falling over her shoulders. She looked exhausted, frightened, and unsure of where to go. When she noticed Elias, she froze. Her eyes widened, and she stepped back carefully, as if unsure whether he was safe to approach. Elias raised his hands gently to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." Too. His voice carried calmness, and the girl's shoulders eased a little, though she still watched him with careful eyes. Elias noticed she was breathing quickly, as if she had been walking a long distance without rest. He took another slow step forward. "Are you lost?" he asked. She did not answer in words, but she shook her head slightly, then looked over her shoulder, as if she feared someone might be following her. Her expression held more worry for something behind her than for Elias himself. Elias followed her gaze but saw nothing in the distance except shadows and moonlit shrubs. Still, he trusted her fear. People, especially young ones, did not move through the desert at night without a reason. The girl looked back at him, her eyes silently asking for help, even if she couldn't speak it. Elias felt something stir in him, something he had not felt in a long time. The old urge to care for someone, to protect, to give comfort where it was needed. He stepped aside and gestured toward his camp. "You can rest there," he said softly. "It's safe." The girl hesitated only a moment before she nodded gently. Her steps were slow, almost dragging, and Elias could see she was exhausted. When she reached the firelight, she blinked at the warmth and brightness, as if it felt unfamiliar after the cold night. Elias guided her to sit on a soft patch of ground near the fire. Dusty watched from the side, quietly sniffing the air. The girl looked up at the horse with a mixture of fear and wonder, but Dusty lowered his head kindly, as if offering a greeting. Elias knelt a few feet away from her, keeping a respectful space so she wouldn't feel cornered. "Do you want water?" he asked. The girl didn't answer in words, but her eyes said yes. Elias handed her his canteen. She held it with both hands and drank slowly, as if every sip felt like a gift. When she finished, she handed it back with a small, grateful nod. "I'm Elias," he said quietly. "Elias Ward." She didn't repeat the name, but she listened closely. Then she touched her chest lightly and whispered something very soft, a single word that sounded like Nalin. Her voice was faint, almost carried away by the wind. Elias smiled gently. "Nalin," he repeated, making sure he said it kindly and respectfully. She lowered her eyes shyly, but a hint of comfort showed in her face. Nalin glanced around the camp with curiosity. Elias had only simple things: a blanket roll, a kettle, a small cooking pan, but she studied them as if they offered a sense of safety. Every so often, she looked over her shoulder again, toward the darkness, as if remembering something that troubled her. Elias noticed and tried to reassure her. "You're safe here," he said. "No one will bother you." Nalin looked at him, then at the fire, then at the sky. Slowly, her breathing grew calmer. Elias added a small piece of wood to the fire to let it burn brighter, offering more warmth. In that moment, Elias could see more clearly how young she was. Barely 13. Perhaps, and how tired. Her feet were dusty, her hair messy from the wind, and her clothes looked worn from travel. Elias's heart felt heavy with worry for her. No child should be wandering alone at night, in the open desert. He sat nearby, giving her space but staying close enough to let her know she wasn't alone. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was gentle, not uncomfortable. Nalin slowly relaxed her posture, letting the warmth soothe her. After several minutes, she raised her hand and pointed toward the distant hills. She said a few soft words in her own language, words Elias did not understand. But from her gestures, he sensed she had come from that direction, and that something had separated her from her people. She then touched her arm lightly, showing a small scrape. Nothing serious, but enough to show she had fallen earlier. Elias nodded in understanding, keeping his expression kind. He offered her a cloth to clean it gently. She accepted it with care. When she finished, she looked at Elias with quiet gratitude. He nodded softly, placing the cloth aside. "You're all right now," he said. Nalin finally allowed herself to relax fully, drawing her knees close and resting her head lightly on her arms. The fire crackled softly beside them. The land felt peaceful again, as if the night understood the girl needed calm. Elias sat awake, watching the distant shadows and keeping guard without making it obvious. He didn't know who had frightened the girl or why she had been wandering alone, but he knew one thing: clearly someone had needed help tonight, and he had been there to offer it. Hours passed, and Nalin drifted into a quiet sleep. Elias stayed awake a little longer, thinking about the strange feeling he had earlier, the sense that the night had been carrying something toward him. Now he understood. Sometimes life brought people together at the exact moment they needed one another. Sometimes two lonely paths touched for reasons the heart understood before the mind did. Elias looked at the sleeping girl and whispered, "You're safe now, little one." He didn't know her story yet, and he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he felt a quiet purpose settling in his heart. Something had led Nalin to him, and he would not turn away from whatever came next. The stars shone brighter above them, as if blessing the meeting of two souls who had found each other by chance, or perhaps by something greater than chance. And as the night deepened, Elias sat beside the fire, watching over the girl, who had walked into his life like a fragile whisper of fate. Morning arrived gently, slipping across the desert like a soft golden blanket. The first rays of sunlight touched the small camp and warmed the cool air. Elias opened his eyes slowly, feeling the quiet peace of dawn before he remembered the events of the previous night. He turned his head and saw Nalin still sleeping near the fire, curled up like a small bird seeking safety. For a moment, Elias simply watched her, sensing how fragile she looked in the soft morning light. The desert wind moved lightly through her long hair, and her face, though tired, appeared more relaxed than it had last night. She must have been walking for hours before she found his camp. Anyone would have been exhausted after such a journey, especially a young girl. Elias rose quietly so he wouldn't wake her. Dusty stood a few feet away, grazing in the pale light. When the horse saw Elias, he lifted his head and gave a gentle sound that Elias always found comforting. "Morning, old friend," Elias whispered, patting Dusty's neck. He stretched his arms, feeling the stiffness of sleeping on the ground, and started preparing a small breakfast. He gathered the leftover wood, added it to the fire, and coaxed the flames back to life. Soon, the smell of warm beans and brewed coffee drifted through the air. While he worked, he kept an eye on Nalin. Unsure how she would feel waking up in a stranger's camp, he wanted her to feel safe. Not confused, not worried, just safe. As the fire crackled, Nalin stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she blinked into the morning light. For a few seconds, she looked unsure of where she was. Then her gaze shifted to Elias, and she relaxed visibly, remembering his kindness from the night before. "Good morning," Elias said gently, offering her a friendly smile. Nalin sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. She didn't speak, but she gave a small nod in reply. Her movements were shy but not fearful, as if she trusted him enough to stay close, but still needed time to feel fully comfortable. Elias pointed toward the warm food. Would you like some? Nalin looked at the pot, then at him, and nodded again. He handed her a small plate, and she accepted it with both hands, eating carefully, quietly. Elias found himself smiling again. There was something peaceful about seeing her safe and sheltered, even for a short moment. While they ate, Elias noticed her gaze drifting often toward the distant hills. She scanned the horizon repeatedly, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. Her eyes had a searching, hopeful look, but also a worried one. It was clear she was thinking about her family. Elias spoke softly, trying not to overwhelm her. Are your people nearby? Nalin paused. She placed a hand over her heart and looked toward the hills again. Elias understood. She missed them. She wanted to return. He set his cup down and tried another gentle question. Were you with them yesterday? This time, Nalin nodded slowly. Then she made a small sweeping gesture with her hands, like showing movement or scattering. Her expression grew sad. Elias watched her quietly, respecting her struggle to communicate. He didn't know the full story, but he understood that she had somehow become separated from her tribe. Whatever had happened must have frightened her deeply. I'll help you, Elias said in his calm, steady way. Nalin blinked up at him, surprise shining in her eyes. Then, something softer replaced the worry on her face, something like trust. They finished breakfast in silence. When Nalin handed back her plate, Elias noticed she kept looking over her shoulder, toward the direction she had come from. He turned and scanned the land himself. Early morning light softened everything. But he felt that strange tug again, the same feeling from the night before, telling him something was approaching. Dusty lifted his head, ears turning toward the north. Elias narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. At first, he saw nothing but rolling land and tall grass. But then he felt it, the soft tremble of the ground. It was faint, almost gentle, but definitely real. It reminded him of the subtle shaking he had sensed last night before Nalin arrived. He frowned slightly. Do you feel that, Nalin? Nalin had already noticed. She stood quietly, her face turning pale with worry, though she didn't step back or run. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, waiting. Elias watched her reaction and understood something important. Whoever was coming, she knew them. This wasn't fear of danger. This was fear of misunderstanding, fear of what her people might think when they saw her with him. He stood calmly, keeping his voice soft and steady. It's all right, he said. You're safe. Nalin didn't move, but her fingers curled nervously around the side of her dress. Within moments, the sound grew clearer. A rhythmic pattern rolled across the land, a steady, unified sound. Elias knew that rhythm. It was the sound of many riders moving together across the desert floor. But he stayed calm. Dusty shifted slightly, but Elias placed a hand on his neck to reassure him. A moment later, the riders came into view. Far in the distance, just tiny shapes at first, a group of Apache warriors appeared, riding across the plain. Their figures moved smoothly with their horses, silhouettes against the brightening morning sky. Elias didn't move immediately. He simply watched, letting Nalin guide the moment. When she stepped forward, he understood this was important to her. She held her hands together near her chest, anxiously waiting for the group to draw closer. As the riders approached, their features became clearer, strong faces, traditional clothing, and expressions of deep focus. They rode with confidence, unity, and purpose. Elias could see that they were looking for something or someone, probably Nalin. Nalin seemed torn between relief and uncertainty. She glanced at Elias, her eyes full of worry that he might misunderstand their arrival. But Elias only gave her a reassuring nod. They're your people, he said softly. It's all right. I'm here. She relaxed only slightly, still waiting for the rider's reaction. The warriors slowed as they reached the edge of Elias's camp. Their horses formed a natural circle around the campsite, not in a threatening way, but in a protective one, protective of Nalin, whom they clearly cared for. Elias kept his hands by his sides, calm and open. He understood how this scene must look. Their young member found beside a stranger. He wanted to seem as non-threatening as possible. The leading rider, a tall man with long dark hair and thoughtful eyes, dismounted first. His gaze moved from Nalin to Elias, studying both. His expression was serious, but not angry. Nalin took a step forward and called out softly in her language. Her voice was small but sincere, her words flowing quickly as she tried to explain. The leader listened closely, his expression softening. He walked toward her, lifting a hand gently to her shoulder, checking she was unharmed. Nalin nodded quickly and pointed at Elias. She spoke more words, her gestures clear she was telling them he had helped her. The warriors exchanged glances, their faces easing as they understood. The tension in the air softened. The leader stepped closer to Elias, still cautious, but no longer guarded. Elias nodded, respectfully. "I'm glad she found her people," Elias said, in a quiet, friendly tone. The leader seemed to understand his kindness even if he didn't speak English fluently. He touched his chest lightly and gave a small nod of gratitude. The other warriors relaxed their posture, watching Nalin with loving care. Some of them spoke to her softly, checking on her, and she answered quietly, pointing to the direction she had come from, explaining everything with calm gestures. Elias felt a warm sense of relief. Nalin was safe now. She belonged among people who loved her, and seeing her reunited with them filled him with gentle gratitude. Nalin walked back to Elias and looked up at him with shining eyes. She made a gesture, a small, soft gesture of thanks, touching her hand to her heart, then extending it toward him. Elias smiled. "You're welcome," he said simply. "I'm glad you're safe." The leader signaled to the group, and they prepared to escort Nalin home. Before she left, Nalin gave Elias one last look, filled with emotion he could not quite read: gratitude, comfort, and perhaps sadness at saying goodbye. Elias gave her a gentle nod. "Take care, little one." Nalin stepped back toward her people. They surrounded her with warmth and reassurance, their presence calm and protective. As they rode away across the brightening desert, Elias stood quietly, watching the morning sun paint gold onto everything it touched. He felt something different inside his chest, something warm, something hopeful. Last night, he had been simply a lonely cowboy, sleeping under the stars. Now, he felt like he had become part of a story bigger than himself. And deep within him, he wondered what changes this meeting would bring to his quiet, wandering life. Elias stood quietly, long after the riders disappeared into the soft morning haze. The desert around him seemed almost too still, as if the land was thinking about what had just happened. He took a slow breath and let it out, feeling a strange mixture of emotions settling inside him. He was happy that Nalin had found her people, of course. But there was also a small ache in his heart, a quiet emptiness that came from watching someone he had protected and cared about ride away so quickly. She had only been with him for a single night, yet her presence had touched something deep in him, something he thought had gone quiet long ago. Dusty nudged his arm gently, bringing him back to the present moment. Elias smiled and stroked the horse's neck. "I know," he murmured. "It's just one of those days." He slowly cleaned up the campsite, folding the blanket, packing away the cooking pan, and shaking the dust off his coat. While he moved, he kept glancing at the hills, imagining Nalin traveling safely among her people. He wasn't sure if he would ever see her again, but the thought didn't make him sad. Instead, it filled him with a soft kind of hope. Elias poured some water on the fire to make sure it was out, then tightened Dusty's saddle. He climbed on and began riding across the plain in no specific direction. The day was bright and warm, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and faraway rain. Elias guided Dusty at a slow pace, letting the horse choose the way. The desert always felt different after something meaningful happened, as if its silence offered him time to think. He traveled for a while, listening to the soft rhythm of Dusty's footsteps. His mind kept drifting to the moment the Apache warriors had first appeared. Their quiet strength, their watchful eyes, their deep love for Nalin, it had moved him more than he expected. He had seen many groups of travelers and families over the years, but rarely had he seen such unity. He remembered the gentle nod from the leader, the silent gratitude in his eyes. Elias wondered what that man's life was like. Did he have children? Did he carry the same unspoken worries that every protector carried? There was something comforting in knowing that even though Elias wandered alone, there were people out there who loved and watched over one another. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. Elias stopped by a small cluster of rocks to let Dusty drink water from his canteen and to rest in the shade. He sat on the warm ground, looking out across the land. The world felt wide and inviting, but for the first time in a long while, Elias felt a pull, not forward, not backward, but inward. Something inside him was shifting, opening, awakening. His thoughts were interrupted by a new sound. Elias stood and listened, surprised to recognize the soft rhythm of approaching riders again. It wasn't hurried or loud. It was careful and steady, almost respectful. Dusty lifted his head and flicked his ears forward. Elias stepped out from behind the rocks, scanning the horizon. And there, appearing once again in the distance, were the Apache riders. Not all of them, just a few. Their figures moved smoothly through the heat shimmer, heading straight toward him. Elias felt a brief moment of confusion. Why were they coming back? Was something wrong? Did Nalin need help? He felt no fear, only a deep concern that something might have unsettled the girl after they left. As the riders approached, he recognized the same leader from earlier. The man slowed his horse to a gentle stop a few feet away and dismounted with calm grace. His expression was not sharp or troubled, it was thoughtful, almost warm. Nalin wasn't with them, Elias noticed. That eased one worry, but raised another curiosity. The leader approached Elias and placed a hand lightly on his own chest again, the same gesture he had given earlier. Elias understood it as a greeting, a respectful one. He nodded in return. The leader spoke in his language, his voice calm and steady. Elias didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone. Gratitude, sincerity, and perhaps something more thoughtful. Another rider stepped forward, a young man with kind eyes. He spoke in slow, careful English, bridging the gap between the two men. Our chief wants to thank you, the young man said. You helped Nalin. She is important to us. Elias nodded. I'm glad she's safe. She is safe, the messenger continued, smiling slightly. Because of you. The leader then retrieved something wrapped in a small piece of soft cloth. He held it gently, as if it was something meaningful. When he unfolded the cloth, Elias saw a small handmade item, a woven bracelet made with colorful thread and tiny wooden beads. It was simple, but beautiful, crafted with care. The leader offered it to Elias with both hands. Elias was taken by surprise. For me? He asked quietly. The young man translated the chief's words. It is a gift. To show respect. To remember. Nalin. Elias felt something warm bloom in his chest. He accepted the gift slowly and carefully, as if it were something delicate. Thank you, he said, his voice soft with sincerity. I'll keep it safe. The chief nodded, pleased that Elias understood the meaning. For a moment, they stood in peaceful silence. The wind moved between them, lifting the beads of the bracelet so they made a small, gentle clicking sound. It felt like the world was acknowledging the moment. Then the young man translated again. Chief says, "You can travel through our land. No trouble. You are welcome here." Elias's eyes widened slightly. This was no small gesture. Being welcomed by a tribe, especially one that valued trust and harmony, was a rare honor. Elias touched the bracelet gently, humbled beyond words. "Tell him." Elias paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tell him I'm honored. Truly. A live life. A live life. A live life. Truly." The young man translated, and the chief nodded once more. Before they left, the leader looked out across the land, then at Elias, as if wanting to tell him something more, something that didn't need words. Elias understood. They were thanking him not just for one night of help, but for treating Nalan with kindness, patience, and respect. The riders mounted their horses again. Before riding away, the young man smiled at Elias. "Maybe we meet again," he said. Elias tipped his hat. "I'd like that." The group rode off, disappearing into the desert just as quietly as they had arrived. Elias stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight and meaning of what had just happened. Slowly, he slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. It looked small there, but it felt powerful, like a symbol of trust, a reminder of connection, a gentle mark of the night that had changed everything. He ran his fingers over the beads, imagining Nalan weaving them with small, careful hands. The thought touched him deeply. Dusty nudged him again, as if asking what they should do next. Elias smiled softly. "I suppose we keep riding," he said. "But the world feels a little different now, doesn't it?" He climbed onto Dusty's back and rode slowly across the bright desert. The bracelet warmed under the sun, and each time it brushed his skin, Elias felt a quiet comfort. He wasn't alone, not in the way he once believed. He had crossed paths with strangers who had become something more. He had been trusted, thanked, and welcomed. The memory of Nalan's shy smile and the chief's respectful nod stayed with him like gentle echoes. Life, he realized, had a way of giving people exactly what they didn't know they needed. And as the day stretched on, Elias felt something new growing inside him. Something softer, something hopeful, something alive. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in many years, he felt ready for whatever path the world placed before him. The quiet morning settled over the small camp with a soft light. Warming the earth where the cowboy and the Apache people stood, the sun rose slowly, stretching long shadows across the ground. Elias felt its warmth on his face, but his heart was still tense. Even though the warriors had lowered their weapons, he was not yet sure what would happen next. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides and tried to stay calm, letting the moment unfold on its own. Chief Taza studied Elias with serious eyes, as if he was trying to read the truth inside him. The other warriors also watched him closely. Their horses snorted softly and pawed at the dirt, waiting for the next command from their leader. Nalan stood between them and the cowboy, still holding the small blanket Elias had given her the night before. Her face was brighter now, no longer fearful, and she kept glancing from her chief to the cowboy, as if she wanted both sides to understand each other fully. The chief finally stepped closer to Elias. He was tall, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen many challenges. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he spoke in a steady tone that carried respect and authority. "You helped the girl," he said, his English slow but clear. "She says you kept her safe." Elias nodded once. "I just did what any decent person would do," he answered. "She was in trouble. I couldn't walk away. Endline. She was in trouble. Endline way. She was in trouble." Taza observed him for a long time, then turned to two of his warriors and signaled with his hand. They rode toward the place where the hunters had fallen the night before. Elias watched them disappear over the small ridge and hoped they would find the scene just as he had described it. His stomach twisted slightly, even though he knew he had done nothing wrong. Waiting for judgment from people who did not fully trust him felt heavy. Minutes passed, slow like the drifting clouds above. Nalin moved closer to Elias and gave him a hopeful smile. Though she said nothing, her eyes told him that she believed everything would be all right. Her presence brought him a bit of comfort. At last, the two warriors returned. They halted their horses beside Chief Taza and spoke in their own language, explaining what they had found. Taza listened carefully, nodding once or twice. The expressions of the warriors softened. One of them even glanced at Elias, with a look that suggested a quiet thankfulness. Taza then faced Elias again. "Those men," he said. "They were known. They caused trouble before. They did not follow our ways or yours. You were right to stop them." Elias let out a slow breath of relief he didn't realize he had been holding. "I didn't want anyone hurt," he said. "I only wanted to protect the girl." "You did," Taza replied. "And for that, we are grateful." The air around them felt lighter now. The warriors lowered their shoulders, no longer standing in the tense posture of people ready for danger. Some of them began speaking quietly among themselves, discussing what they had witnessed. The horses swayed gently. Sensing the calm settling over the group, Taza reached into a pouch hanging from his saddle and took out a small wooden carving shaped like a leaf. The carving was smooth and carefully made, showing the skill of someone who had practiced for years. He held it out to Elias. "This is a sign," Taza explained. "If you travel through our land, show this. It tells our people that you have shown kindness. You will have safe passage." Elias looked at the carving with surprise. It was more than a simple object. It was a symbol of trust from people who rarely gave it to strangers. He accepted it gently. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "I'll keep it safe." Nalin stepped forward with something of her own. She removed a thin bracelet made from leather and small beads. The colors were soft and warm, like the desert at sunset. She placed it in Elias's hand with care. "For you," she said in a quiet voice. "So you remember." Elias smiled, touched by the gesture. "I won't forget," he replied. The chief said something to his warriors, and they began to prepare to leave. They mounted their horses, but waited for Taza, who stood silently for another moment, as if considering his final words. "Finally," he said, "the desert is wide. Many people walk it. Few do what you did. May your path be peaceful." Elias tipped his hat in respect. "And yours as well." With that, the warriors guided their horses away, forming a graceful line as they rode across the valley. Their figures slowly grew smaller, blending with the landscape until they disappeared into the horizon. Nalin looked back at Elias one last time, lifted her hand in a small wave, and then followed her people. The camp became quiet again. Elias stood alone, feeling the weight of the silence. But this silence was different from the loneliness he usually felt. It carried a sense of meaning, as if something inside him had shifted. He looked at the bracelet in his hand, and then at the wooden carving. They weren't just gifts, they were reminders that even in a vast and sometimes harsh world, acts of kindness still mattered. He packed up his small camp slowly, thinking about everything that had happened in the last day. Saving Nalin had been a sudden decision, made without thinking about the consequences. Yet it had led him to a moment of connection that he had not felt in a long time. After losing his family, he had built walls around his heart. He had kept to himself, believing that distance was easier than loss. But now he realized that caring for someone, even briefly, brought a quiet strength he had forgotten. He saddled his horse, Whisper, and patted her neck. "Well, girl," he said softly, "looks like we made some friends today." Whisper flicked her ears, as if agreeing in her own gentle way. Elias turned his horse toward the open range. The day stretched before him with clear skies and warm sunlight. As he rode forward, he felt no rush. Each step of his horse felt steady, as if guiding him toward a new chapter he hadn't expected. He passed the ridge where the hunters had fallen. For a moment, He paused and looked at the ground. Life in the West was often unpredictable, filled with choices that shaped a person's path. But Elias knew one thing for certain. He had made the right choice. Continuing his ride, he followed a narrow trail that wound through tall grass and scattered stones. The wind brushed against his face, carrying scents of sage and dry earth. Birds circled overhead, calling out as they skimmed the warm air. Elias let the moment sink in, allowing himself to feel peaceful instead of burdened. As the hours passed, memories of Nalin's grateful smile returned to him again and again. That simple smile had touched a place in his heart he thought had grown silent long ago. The carving from Chief Taza hung safely from his belt, knocking gently against his side as he rode. The bracelet fit around his wrist comfortably, a quiet reminder of gratitude and trust. By the time the sun began to lower, painting the sky with golden light, Elias reached a higher ridge. From there, he could see miles of quiet land stretching in every direction. He stopped his horse and took a long look at the beautiful scene. He felt changed not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a calm, steady way. A part of him that had been empty now felt full. A part of him that had been lonely now felt connected, even if just through memories and small tokens. He understood that kindness mattered deeply, even when no one was watching. He straightened in his saddle and looked toward the distant line where the sky touched the earth. "Let's keep going," he said to Whisper. "There's still a lot of road left." With gentle steps, his horse moved forward. The cowboy rode on, not as the lonely man he once was, but as someone who had found a sense of purpose again, someone who carried friendship and gratitude in his heart. And though he traveled alone, he no longer felt lonely. Because somewhere out there, across the wide open land, a tribe remembered him. A brave girl remembered him. And that was enough to light his path for many days to come.